iTestify is about testifying of what Jesus Christ has done and can do in each of our lives. Through testimony of people just like you, and through study of His Word, our prayer is to encourage each follower of Christ to be a light in this world. So let your light shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father, which is in heaven. Matthew 5:16.
Hi, and thank you for joining us today on iTestify. We are very blessed today with our guest. His name is John Huynh, and he is the fundraising coordinator for the Center of Online Evangelism. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
And so can you start off by kind of briefly sharing your testimony, how the Lord led you to Christ and how the Lord used you to bring others to Christ?
Sure. Growing up, my dad was Buddhist and my mom was Baptist. And so every other Sunday, I would go to my mom's church, and then the next Sunday I'd go to a Buddhist temple, and I switched on and off right there. And then one day, I decided to think to myself, you know what? If God is real, I'll worship Him. This was at 12 years old, okay? So 12 years old, I was thinking in my mind, if God is real, I'll worship Him. If He isn't real, I'd rather be at home watching Pokemon. So I was thinking to myself, it makes logical sense. And so I came up to my pastor and I said, hey, do you mind giving me Bible studies? I want to learn more about God. And if He's real, I'll worship Him. If not, I'd rather be at home. And to which he said, you know what, John, you're a little bit too young for this. Come back to me to study about the Bible when you're a little bit older. So bummed out. I was really bummed out. I came back home, or I went downstairs, actually. I remember that day. I went downstairs, and God would have it that there was a flyer at the church Baptist doors. And it was a flyer to talk about Bible prophecy. And the flyer had included all these beasts and so forth. And I thought, man, end of the world, that's crazy. You know what I mean? I want to learn more about that. And so at the age of 12, I was like, I want to go. But at that time, at 12 years old, who would drive you? No one would drive me. And so I was bummed out again. The next day, however, my grandmother was like, hey, I saw you eyeing that poster. A friend of mine from another church is actually, their church is sponsoring a 15-passenger van, and they can drive us all there. Would you like to come with Grandma? And so I was so excited. I went there, and I came to the meetings. They had a series of meetings in Buena Park in the year 2000, and I came to the meetings, and it was a Mark Finley seminar, and I got baptized through there. Learning about God and so forth, and it was such an amazing journey. And then after that, actually, I came into the church and brought my grandmother in to the church.
Your grandmother wasn't convinced by the study because she was going with you.
Yeah. She wasn't. She was getting convinced, but she wasn't all there yet. But we kept on studying the Bible, and she came in with me.
And how old were you then when you brought your grandmother?
I was probably about 13 and a half around there. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Your pastor who said at 12 you're too young to study obviously was quite wrong.
There you go. Praise God. Praise God. Actually, when I came to the seminar, they wanted to put me into the children's room. I said no. put me in the main session. So we did that, and God has led the way and brought many people into the church.
Praise God.
So my grandmother actually, it didn't stop there. I brought in my sister. My sister came into the church, brought in my mom. She came into the church, brought in my best friend into the church in my college years. And then he brought in his next door neighbor. And my next door neighbor is now my sister's boyfriend. So it all works out. Actually, because of this, I'll have to come home and ask her to thank me because of that.
And your sister's actually been on the show as well.
Yes.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So what do you do now? Like, what do you do for a living? And then you obviously were having on the show not only just to share how God brought you into the church.
Sure.
You're involved in ministry.
Sure. So I can tell you a little bit about the background a little bit. So growing up, I worked in the ministry for a while. I grew up, went to college, majored in business. It was a difficult thing to decide because within the Adventist church, you want to have limited options, whether it be a pastor or a medical person. there's no other options, right? And so when I came to pick my major, it was in business. And at that time, I was conflicted because many people were saying, you know what, John, that's not a good path to go in, because there's a lot of corruption and so forth. How can a faithful Christian survive in that arena? But I said, you know what, that's exactly why I'm going. So I'm going to, prove how it's done. Worked at, so I became, I was trained to become a fundraiser. I worked as a fundraiser with this media ministry called Breath of Life at the Adventist Media Center. After that, I went to work at the General Conference, the world headquarters of the Adventist Church. Worked at Hope Channel there as their fundraising director. And after that, I decided to come back home to Southern California. It was too cold in Maryland. Actually, it was my dad. I was wondering. We were great. We were raising a lot of money to bring people into the mission field and so forth. But God was convicting me, John, I placed your dad in front of you for a reason. Are you gonna be one of those guys one of those pastors where he wins his whole congregation but loses his family? And so I said, okay, that's right. And so I decided to come back home. And my dad's starting to attend church every now and then. He's not there yet, but he's starting to. So praise God for that. So that was my career path, and I decided to come back afterwards.
Are you still doing fundraising?
I am still doing fundraising for a different type of ministry. It's called Center for Online Evangelism, as their fundraising director as well.
Excellent.
That's awesome. So it's interesting how even though you chose business, and to many people it didn't seem like an obvious path to evangelism, yet the Lord still used that to reach many people for Christ through the financial means. And you're back in Southern California to evangelize to your family. So can you go into a little bit more detail about the ministry that you're doing?
Sure. And it's funny how you brought that up, Wade. I always knew there was a tingling inside of me that to become a business person. I actually, at the age of this is before my Christian years, right? So at the 4th grade, I was selling illegal fireworks out of my backpack to kids and so forth. So, I always had that knack for business. But when I got into the baptismal pool, I was actually, before they were calling people to come up, and before I got baptized, I was actually sitting in the seats, and I said, God, please, okay, so in my community, I grew up in a low-income community, very rough neighborhood. Every kid, when you ask kids, hey, what do you want to do when you grow up? People would say, hey, my kids around the community would say, hey, instead of wanting to become a doctor or a police officer or a lawyer and something like that, the kids in my neighborhood would say, gang member, right? And so, but I was thinking to myself long and hard, I said, man, I'm not cut out to be a gang member. You know what I mean? Like, I'm too scrawny, and so I'll get beat up. And so I was wondering, like, hey, how's that going to work, And I figured to myself, you know what? I'm good at business. I want to be a black marketing boss one day to sell illegal things on the market, right? And then fast forward this baptismal pool, like I'm standing in front of the baptismal pool, and I said, hey, God, please, I don't know what it looks like in business, but use me in a big way that deals with a lot of money to bring the church forward, right? And not knowing that whatever I would do and the things in place, but that was the path, right? And so here I am. I come back to Southern California, and now I work for the ministry called Center for Online Evangelism. It is a ministry where we train people, missionaries, into the online world to share the gospel for the online world and so forth. But more importantly, we have this project called Project Caleb, and Project Caleb is to clean up all the negative content about the Adventist Church online. So when you type in Ellen White or the Adventist Church, there is no negative content coming out of that. So we want to be able to clean up that whole entire thing. And you guys know how important it is for the online reputation. Maybe you guys, I don't know if you guys deal with this, but whenever you look for new food places and stuff like that, what app do you guys use?
Yelp.
Yelp, right?
Google. Or
Google.
What's that? There's that cow one. Happy Cow?
Happy Cow.
Happy Cow.
Okay.
Happy Cow.
So if the review was like 2 stars, would you go?
No.
Probably not.
Maybe not even a 3-star restaurant, no?
4.5.
Yeah, probably
4.5
not.
minimum,
4.5.
right?
Yeah.
And so with that, we don't even set foot into new restaurants to do that. So it doesn't really matter how many doors we knock or how many tracts we hand out to people. It doesn't even matter if how we're broadcasting this. As long as the internet, the new generation with the millennials and so forth, and the next generation, as long as they Google the Adventist Church or Ellen White, everything's a waste because there's negative content about it over there.
That's such an interesting concept that now church and a religion can be like a consumer good.
Yeah.
Rather than, for what it is, a way of life.
It is.
Interesting.
And it's not, it's nothing that we're hiding that is negative per se. We believe that we present the message, or the Seventh-day Adventist Church presents such a beautiful message of God, of Jesus, right? And that's why I stepped from being a Baptist into being a Seventh-day Adventist, because it's the most beautiful message that I can think of, right? But even so, the world has misconceptions about it. And so we're not presenting ourselves in the best light. And that's why this ministry is aimed to change all that, where we're presenting the best, our best foot forward and saying, this is the real truth, rather than having other people say what it is.
I'm glad that you mentioned that. I think that that's very important because just what you were talking about before in business and how to run a business as a Christian is not about hiding things and, putting things in secret and putting only this part forward, but it is just standing up for what we truthfully believe and then communicating that with the rest of the world.
Absolutely.
Is what I hear you're saying.
And being transparent as well.
Yes, being transparent.
Absolutely.
But doing it in I guess, in a way and in an area where people communicate nowadays.
Absolutely.
Another form of communication.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the way that the internet's going, it's where people get all of their information from.
True.
We're stemming away from printed newspapers, even websites where you get information from. It's usually going to be all one source, like Facebook, where you're just going to Google a specific topic, and to have the access of our church's, persona have such a negative light because we don't get the positive traffic.
Yeah.
When you can direct that positive traffic.
Absolutely.
And it seems like such a valuable resource to be able to promote.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh, wait, can you? I was curious to if you would talk more about how you came up with the name Project Caleb.
It's actually we'll get into the Bible verse later, but it's Project Caleb was based on overcoming evil with good. That's the tagline, right? And so Caleb was fighting giants, and it isn't per se that we're so behind in the online world that we're up against giants. These negative content that people that are pumping out about the church. But the typical thing would be the outside world would try to overcome evil with evil, but we want to overcome evil with good. And it actually works in the search engine optimization world as well too, in that, so you're asking the top 10 pages of Google when you type in Seventh-day Adventist Church or something like that, the top 10 pages, how do we get the negative content down? And the best way to do it is we put positive content to displace the negative ones. Not necessarily, if you look up these negative websites nowadays, it's not because they're true or anything like that. It's because we've never been able to present our positive lights.
There's nothing else.
There's nothing else to say. When a typical churchgoer, you can read all those negative comments and you'll be like, hey, this is nothing. This is all fluff and stuff. I can't believe people are actually falling for these things.
Yeah.
But like Ellen White's such a general, Ellen White Adventist, like it's such a general search.
Yeah.
And you can have both sides of the coin on that one, negative and positive. How would you per se make that one positive, or what would you hone in on positive to make that come up?
Yeah, I mean, even with there are positive testimonies of people who have encountered her literature, knowing that, hey, this is biblical things, right? So we want to be able to push those blogs or anything that is on page 1. For instance, even with the way that we view death, right? For instance, how do you push or hellfire would be a better example. People viewing hellfire as like, hey, once you go into hell, that you're burning forever and ever. But how do we do it in a way that we're presenting the positive side, which is, no, we're not burning forever and ever, because a loving God would never do such a thing like that. So we're actually putting out materials that deal with those issues right there, that help people understand God in an even more beautiful light. That
And
God
in an
is,
accurate light.
and more accurate light. Absolutely.
Are you guys working in a way to bring out, like, for example, if I type in Ellen White Adventist, are you guys doing anything with that, like with an algorithm? Are you working with the company to do that, or are you just putting things up that when I type in certain words will more than likely bring me to your site rather than a negative one? I'm just curious how that works.
So without getting in on technical terms and so forth, but Google has an algorithm. Google picks sites that are favorable, right? And so if the website is let's say read and so forth, right? Google wants to pick, if I Google read, Google is looking for websites that have the highest reputation and is well maintained and so forth and has a lot of foot traffic. That way it pushes read up. And it might say, hey, read for mayor or something like that, you know? So that's what it is, and that's how Google looks at it. So the more that we control these sites and say, the more people, in a positive light, and people gaining traction and people using it, it slowly pushes it all the way to the top.
I see. Before we go into the Bible verses, you have a PowerPoint slide for us to look at? And please kind of go through what you have pointed up there.
Yeah, I want to share this with you. These are some of the searches that people are searching for. These are Google searches per month. Okay, so you got to multiply it by 12. But people are asking, who is God? 49,000 people each month are searching, typing in Google, who is God? Is God real? 4,500. Adventists, 200,000. Ellen White, 27,000. 10 Commandments. So if you look at that, the Adventist church, people are typing in Adventists, 200,000. And if they find something negative about it, that's 200,000 people per month we're turning away. That's 200,000 people that they could be watching this broadcast and we'll be pushing it to them, but we just turned them away, right? So 10 Commandments, 385,000. It's still pretty relevant today. People are like concerned about the 10 Commandments. Life after death, 74,000. Suicidal thoughts, 49,000. God, please help me, 18,000. And death, 450,000.
Wow.
And so when you're looking at this, you know that people are hurting out there. So what can we do if, you know, the last 4 suicidal thoughts and so forth, right? If we can position ourselves and say, hey, when they're typing in suicidal thoughts, we can say, hey, there is hope. And then that's where they'll hit our pages.
Are you also working with people to create content for these? I mean, do we have content for everything here? That's just curious.
Yeah, so we're working with existing content as well as content that we developed as well. And, you know, we're always looking for volunteers. So if anybody out there is watching this and they want to support this ministry, we're looking for people as well, too. We're willing to train you. We're looking for churches who we want to be able to say, hey, if we search up a church in the city of Laguna Beach, right? We want to be able to pop up as the number 1 church, right? So those are the type of things, digital things that we want to do and work with people on.
Yeah, especially if the number 1 that pops up is Adventist, and they're like, well, what's Adventist? Google. And if we don't have a good foundation for what that looks like, then they'll be like, oh, this doesn't look so good. I don't want to go to that church that's number 1 in the area. So that foundation that you're building is pivotal for the growth of the church. It's just a great idea. I think it's phenomenal. Another thing you touched on, which I think is true, is that business has such a negative stigma when it comes to the church. And the Bible talks so much about money in general that I don't know. I mean, we have the priests were collecting tithe. I mean, the whole structure of how the church functioned was based on money management, good stewardship. And to say that, well, we're gonna go forward with the gospel, but we're not going to manage our money well or know how effectively to use it, doesn't make a lot of sense.
Right.
It doesn't.
God owns, you know, a cattle on 1,000 hills, but He still says you need to manage those hills well.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely. I think I can totally relate to you, you know, because God has given us, I have a philosophy, we can't give what we don't have. So we can't if we don't manage our finances correctly, then there's nothing to give.
True.
If we don't manage our spiritual life correctly, there's nothing to give either.
Totally true.
That's stewardship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So bring us to the Bible,
Sure.
to your Bible verses.
Sure. Let's do this. I got a few verses. Let's go to Matthew chapter 6:33.
And audience, please feel free to follow along either on your phones or within the analog version. Matthew what?
6:33. And this has always been my core verse or life verse. And it's, but seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. I encourage those listeners out there or viewers out there that, this has been a core testimony for me, is because people always, after they pursue family, they pursue careers or relationships, and then they pursue God. But this verse says that, no, seek me first, and all things fall into place, right? And even success and so forth, right? We tend to chase after success. No, God says, keep me first, and all these things of the desires of your heart, I will give it to you, and that has always been the core value of, and God has always blessed my footsteps because of that. And so I enjoy that. Let's go to another verse. Let's go to Revelation 1:6. Revelation 1:6. And it says, and he has made us kings and priests to his God and Father. To him be the glory and dominion forever and ever. Amen. I know this seems like a simple verse, and what can you extract from there? But actually, there's two roles in there. It's kings and priests. Oftentimes, we think as a church, we often think that, hey, a pastor is the only route to go. But there's two distinct functions right there. You have kings and you have priests. Right? And so kings, some are called to be kings and some are called to be priests. With kings, of course, we're not ruling a kingdom, but if you bring it to modern day terms, kings have dominion. And I believe that as a Christian, God is calling us to wherever we're at in the field, wherever we're at in the marketplace, to seize dominion for God. Because in a sense, we are showing that true light, because we're showing the world, hey, nobody can rule like we do. We treat our employees correctly. We treat everyone else around the community correctly and so forth, the kings.
Or we treat the environment correctly.
Exactly.
It's so interesting because so often we look at God or Christ even as being such a meek character who's humble, who didn't, do much in terms of his kingdom. That's how the Jews viewed him, and that's how we see him still, even how he's painted. But we forget that he's an almighty, powerful God. That, in many times in Revelation, he's viewed as something that's almost scary, even though we wouldn't view him as that. But I think he calls us, like you said, to be kings and priests, people who are going to be on the offensive, not the defensive.
Absolutely.
People who are ready to take charge and do something with what we have and not sit there and have a very meek voice. And so I think there can be both sides, and that we shouldn't shun one for the other.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I was thinking also about these verses and your testimony and what you're doing in ministry. And there's this personal aspect to the verse in Matthew 6:33, where it's speaking directly to you, to each of us. And there's this impersonal quality when people think of the internet. But what you're talking about in terms of this of SEO and those search terms, those questions were so personal. I'm hurting. What about death? Those are super personal questions that actual real people are struggling with. And so that there's that level of separation that I think it seems to me like you're trying to build a bridge.
Absolutely. And this verse actually matches in with the Center of Online Evangelism as well too. We're trying to conquer dominion for God on the online world.
Your sphere of influence,
Absolutely.
that's a person-to-person thing. It can't I guess it's more powerful the more people are involved.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Online dominion reminds me of a biblical spy of old who was gaining dominion for God during the Israelites wandering in the desert. Is there a character that kind of inspires you there?
Sure. You know, Caleb, you know, we had this entire...
Nice way.
Thanks for the softball hit. So, you know, there's this character inside the Bible. His name is Caleb. You know, actually one of my favorite Bible characters. Love him so much that I might name my son, if I ever get a son, after Caleb. But, you know, his journey was, he was trying to conquer giants. And the online world is so big that we're trying to conquer the online world to share the gospel there. You know, the project itself is $4.5 million, right? And it's so big that we can't handle it on our own. So if you, I'm going to put a shameless plug out there, if you feel compelled to support a ministry like this, especially for the young people, I guarantee you it will not go to waste. You know, the Center for Online Evangelism, you can visit our website that is on the screen, but we encourage you to come participate. There's this verse in Romans 12:21. Let's go there. And this is the theme of the ministry. Romans 12:21. And it says, "Do not overcome evil, but overcome evil with good." Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Many of the world's tactics is, hey, if you're evil towards me, I'm going to repay you with evil, and that's how I beat you. But in Caleb's position, it was overcome evil with good. He was fighting with God through it all, right? But at the same time, the online world, in order for us to push the positive content in, we're not talking about things like slandering them back. We're replacing it with positive content, right? So that's what Christians too. We're called to go in the marketplace and displace all the negative things with good, with Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I agree. It'd be good to implement that in our own lives.
Absolutely.
I think online, you know, everyone forums where people discuss certain topics can get out of hand, and so it's difficult to not retaliate when someone attacks you. So I think it's a good principle to live out overall. But
It has to do with accountability too, right? Because people feel, oh, I'm not accountable to anyone because I'm hidden behind this online username or whatever.
yeah, exactly.
But God gives you accountability.
Absolutely.
Well, you already mentioned how people could get involved through your site. How long do you foresee until we start seeing changes on the internet?
It is a 5-year plan.
Okay.
But the longer we wait, and you know how technology is, what is in today might not be in tomorrow. So there is a wave that we're already a little bit behind. But if we don't jump on the wave immediately, we would miss the wave totally. Right? And so, you know, I encourage people to jump on as fast as possible so that we can get this thing done. But we should be able to see results within 3 years.
Wow. Well, thanks, John. Thank you for coming on the show and sharing what God is using this ministry to do. And we encourage you to go online and check out Adventism and see what positive things come up. And please join us next week for LLBN's iTestify. Thank you for joining us.